welcome to another episode of the Brown and Black podcast. My name is Jack Rico.
And I'm Mike Sargent.
And every week we take a look at race and pop culture through a brown and black lens. Mike, how do you make a country whiter without saying you're making it whiter?
Dude, every freaking speech that Donald Trump makes. I know we're going to explore it in this episode, but I had some questions too. And the question I really have, and I feel that affects what we do and what we care about, is can regressive government policies halt the momentum of culture?
That's a huge thing. That trickle-down effect is something I also want to explore. But in this episode, for a lot of you guys, this is our first episode of 2025. And there's a lot to talk about because, number one, we are definitely going through, for Hispanics, they're starting to understand that their vote might not have gone the way they thought it would go. And a lot of these Latino Trump voters are seeing a lot of their families be deported.
It's so crazy that we voted for Trump. We trust him with the word that he promised us Latinos. I hate that I voted for him. Now I'm so scared for my family.
But now it is so in your face. They're telling you, I don't want anything to do with DEI, which is, to me, a dog whistle term for people of color.
It is so much a dog whistle for people of color. And I think even more specifically, definitely Black. They're attacking Latinos and immigrants on one front in a very specific way. And when you say DEI, it's such a charged term because what does that actually mean? Because what it means, it's like when they took the term woke and weaponized it. Woke just meant be aware. And DEI meant inclusive. But it's turned into this whole thing. We're a day out from this plane crash where in some way it had to do with DEI. And if you listen to the language, you said, how do you say make a country white? I'm going to play this clip to you right now.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense.
To me, that says everything. I'll be honest with you, Jack, we don't really do politics here, but it's impossible not to be affected by what's going on. And we have such cultural momentum right now with the amount of Black films that were at Sundance, with the amount of brown and Black films that are coming out this year, and all these things we want to talk about that have already happened because of our recent past.
And then we're also going to discuss the Oscar-nominated Netflix movie Emilia Perez.
Yes.
And the Mexican backlash that has arisen, not so much because the movie is made by the French, but told using a Mexican story. It's not even really about that. This backlash is more about cultural integrity in film and more about responsible storytelling. How do you tell a story without denigrating the culture you're telling the story about? And it raises a bigger question for me, Mike, about the battle between creators and audiences. Who has the right to tell another culture story? And who has the right on how to tell that story? And I think that's what's at stake with this Emilia Perez movie. Whoever controls the narrative controls the power.
We just won a Signal Gold Award, which I'm very proud of. But the category that we won in, ironically, was for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was for an episode that we did called The Color of Aspiration, Are Latinos the Next Whites? When you read what the award is about, it says individual episodes that aims to celebrate and or promote diversity, equity, and inclusion of all kinds, racial, gender, neurological, etc. Now, that's a good definition of what DEI is, not what certain people say it stands for, it didn't earn it. So the question I have is, with these mandates that are coming down from the government, these executive orders, and I'm sure you've read that Rutgers University had to cancel the HBCU conference they were going to have that was going to be happening during Black History Month. And all of this is happening just before Black History Month. So my question is, will a category like this even be allowed? Will they be against the law to even have this category for us to have won in? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, everything that brown and black is
the idea of being diverse and including our diversity and getting together.
Right. And why do you think it exists? Why do you think this show exists? Being the default white dominant group doesn't include us. We don't like that you get to call all the shots. So this is complete white supremacism. This is complete racism. This is complete classism. This is complete everything-ism. There's no other way to look at it. And so for you to attack it the way you're attacking it and have companies like Target that just came out 2 days ago and withdrew their LGBTQ plus programs.
Yes.
McDonald's, bro, built on brown and black customers. How the hell will history judge you after that?
Listen, we could be doing a 3-hour show, but I will say this, that America, unfortunately, was built on taking advantage of, whether it's labor, culture, inventions of people of color. America took the land from people of color and then used other people of color to build on it and then denied them rights. And that's where we're headed. They're trying to dismantle the Civil Rights Act, dismantle the Voting Act. And here's the thing, it's a strategy that if you've got all of these lawsuits that are trying to fight all of these mandates that the president is going to, oh, that's illegal, that's illegal. Guess what? Eventually, they'll all get kicked up to the Supreme Court, and then what will happen?
They're not even hiding it at this point.
No.
It's so harsh. It's jarring. And the speed in the way it's been done, strategically firestorm, so that we're all in the movies, in these war movies, when you see like somebody who throws in a grenade, that's what it feels like. So we're trying to process the question about, especially for brown and black people who have businesses built around DE&I. Will DEI really go away? I feel that DEI stands for people of color who don't have the equivalent opportunities afforded to them that is afforded to the dominant culture. And then there's the DEI corporate term. This is essentially marketing. It's semantics. Costco doesn't use the word DEI. They use the word people and communities. And you've heard these terms spread around: belonging.
Listen, the term we used to hear was equal opportunity employment. Remember that one?
I feel like that was around the Reagan era.
Exactly.
That I started hearing.
EOE, equal opportunity employment. Yes. DEI was just an extension of that.
What I'm saying to businesses, influencers whose whole identity is based around the industry of DE&I, because DEI is not about political correctness that they've been throwing around. DEI is actually about capitalism. If you get rid of Mexicans, you get rid of all the black and brown people from office, And all you're left with is white people to choose from for work, for dating, for everything. You're not going to get the best of the best that could be from any pocket of culture or any part of the world. And why do you think Elon Musk said that he will die on the H-1B visas if you don't allow immigrants to be a part of the hiring conversation at the highest levels? DEI ain't going anywhere because it is the money engine of the United States of America. It has been since the 1800s. Slavery was what made us the most powerful, most richest country in the world. Mexicans in the late 1800s into the 1900s became the laborers of America. And that labor from brown and black people is so ingrained into the genetic code of this country, Mike, that you cannot separate it from the other. And proof of this, we've been through this bullshit before in history, Mike. Let's go back to 1929, the Great Depression. Jobs started to slowly fade away and narrow down. And instead of having like 100 jobs, you had like maybe 20 jobs. You were fighting for those jobs. Mexican and Mexican Americans who were taking those jobs for much less. So now the whole issue is about money and who gets to have that money. So it's either the dominant culture or the Mexicans. That's when it got to President Hoover and supports this Mexican Repatriation Act. And in it, the guy was like, we feel that you're a threat to the country. If you looked Mexican, you were deported.
Dude, it's like that right now. I'm sure you saw that the second wave and the third wave, they're going to be using bounty hunters and paying them $1,000 and $1,500 per illegal alien.
Yeah, it's going to become an industry, dude.
Exactly. So this is that wild, wild west. We're in that right now. It just got there very quickly.
I've told you about this movie before. California wakes up one morning and all the Mexicans are gone. The state falls apart overnight. It's called A Day Without a Mexican.
My fellow citizens, California has another crisis.
This is a real serious disaster.
And this one may have a greater impact than anything that has ever happened before.
Its severity cannot be underestimated.
We have lost our pride.
It is a state of emergency.
We have lost our dignity.
It's the beginning of the apocalypse.
We have lost our Mexicans.
A day without a Mexican.
I woke up and my husband was gone. And my husband, he is a Mexican. And he would never leave without his teeth.
Every explanation needs to be considered.
Forget about parking your cars at valet. Forget about getting a glass of water at the restaurant.
Then I came here. The place was a mess. I had to wash a dish.
Listen, all of that dystopian shit is happening right now. But you sound a lot more optimistic than I do. Let me put it like that.
It is my opinion that the attack on DEI that is happening right now, and it's actually starting to rise the Democrats that have been either asleep at the wheel or just very indifferent, because now you're fucking with our people. Now you're fucking with some brown or black person's mom, dad, brother, son, daughter that are being fired for the color of their skin, for their nationality or sex, for their politics, for no reason. That's illegal, Mike. And those are the things when you get maybe the breadwinner and you fire them and you don't know what to say to your kids when you come back home. That then starts creating anger.
Exactly. Because DE&I does not just mean brown and black people. And the biggest recipients, and I'm sure you've heard all the reports, the biggest benefactors of DEI and all of those inclusivity programs throughout our country have been white women. And you've heard me say before, they were in my opinion, the biggest force to have put this man in office. All of the misguided brown and black folks, that's a whole other thing. But forget Mr. T. The real, because I don't want to have to say his name, but the real issue is the people. He may be signing these executive orders. He didn't write them.
Exactly. Stephen Miller in the Project 2025, a 920-page step-by-step blueprint of what Trump's doing.
Exactly. So that's the danger. But again, I want to hear your more positive spin than mine, because my spin's different.
Immigration is what makes this country move. It's the growth money machine of this country. The country's becoming more multicultural than it's ever been. We're going to become a country of just mixed people at one point. This idea of white supremacy isn't going to exist because they're going to fall in love with the most beautiful other cultures and start mixing. And the whole country's just going to look like a mixed country. That's why I don't think that this DE&I thing is going to stick, because businesses depend on it. They depend on it so much, dude, that there's no businesses without a multicultural DEI strategy. And every business knows that.
I do agree with you on some of your points. I do believe that ultimately capitalism is what will save, quote unquote, DEI. But I do think that the definition of DEI, or the term DEI, and like you said, it is to some extent it's semantics, but I'm not as optimistic as you for a number of reasons. I'm a science fiction fan. So I absolutely believe we're in a pre-dystopian era right now. And I don't even think people realize just how close we are. Because what you said, oh, overnight it'll all fall apart, it's already happening, and it's going to keep happening, and it's expanding exponentially. You mentioned Costco, and I'm glad you did. You said how they stood up to him. They stood up to him because somebody within Costco, people within Costco said, no, we don't agree.
This is bullying.
This is bullying. And they stood up to the bully. But the biggest question I always had about DEI in this country, and the reason DEI and affirmative action and all of these things had to exist, is because white people in power, if left to their own, will fuck you over. They will take advantage of you. They will never promote you. They won't even hire you. They'll bring in, as this administration has, their friends who are white, who are like them, as unqualified as possible, as corrupt as possible. That's who will be there. How many companies have you ever been to or work with where you meet people like, how the fuck did they get this job? Everybody's experienced that. Now, that is the world that you and I are too young to have known when things were really fucked up in this country. You were talking about history. Here's the question. If they didn't have to hire you, if they didn't have to cater to you, would they? And let me just get back to the division here, because you mentioned all he does is talk about divisiveness. Yeah, that's how you conquer. Divide and conquer. That's a phrase for a reason. There are Mexicans who voted for Trump. They were divided. Whatever they were thinking, they thought it wasn't going to be me, whatever. Any Latino, any black person that voted for Trump, that's division within the race. To me, these companies, and each one of them, they're Target, Walmart, Meta, Ford, Lowe's, Harley Davidson, and each one of them could have said, you know, yeah, there's a legal threat. Like you said, it's barking and Trump is barking, but they all folded. They all folded and they all let it go. So what does that tell me? If I'm with somebody who says, yeah, I'm never going to do that, and then somebody says, you can, and then they do it, what does that tell you? You can go company by company, and each one of them, oh, after George Floyd, they did this. So it was all PR anyway, because a lot of them, they might have made progress. The ones that did, like Boeing, they made progress, but they were quick to drop it. All of our lives, for most of America's history, there are tons of industries. Forget factory work that black people and people of color and Mexican and farm work. Forget all the jobs that we've had to accept as second-class citizens. What about all those jobs that we had to fight to get into? Here's how DEI really hurts. When you hear about him, this barking, here's where the barking to me and the DEI is tied together. Rutgers University, as I mentioned, they've canceled their upcoming HBCU conference. Why? Because of his anti-DEI executive order, this broad anti-DEI. So Rutgers can't celebrate historically black colleges and universities? And then you look at other statistics. Harvard, 43% of white students are legacy athletes related to donors or staff. And then they've had the lowest rate of Black, Latino, and Asian students in decades now. So what does that tell you? All this anti-DEI, that means opportunities to rise. We had Obama. They're like, yeah, that shit isn't going to happen again. They don't want Black and brown folks to go to these colleges, to have these opportunities, to work in these positions. And you heard what Trump said, because the narrative is that we're not intelligent enough. They want to have this patriotic education. They're now going after schools, going after teachers. You can't teach this. You could be arrested for teaching that brown and Black people have value, that Native American people have value, that LGBTQ people are people. So to me, if you've got the philosophy of a country and a government that's enforcing, and then all these people who, if they didn't have to, they clearly wouldn't. For me, I am not as optimistic. There's, thank God, corporations that will stand up to him, yes. But as his power increases, and you also said, in 4 years and midterms, he's trying to push to have a third term. So the more people bend to this person and this philosophy, to this administration, to these precepts, the worse off we'll be. So unfortunately, I feel that it's going to be a long, hard battle. I feel like we have been thrown back 50, 60 years. And I believe they're doing everything they can to dismantle not just affirmative action, the civil rights, the voting acts. They're going after their own. They're going after generals that were against them. They fired all the people that work with Jack Smith. He completely eliminated the full membership of the Federal Aviation Administration's Security Advisory Committee. And before that,
the inspector generals.
They got rid of all the inspector generals. So all the oversight, everything, this is an age of not just, you said earlier before we were recording that we're in this age of
what I said, we are now entering the age where the era of expertise is dead.
I 100% agree with you. That is exactly where we're at. So it's not expertise. It's not merit base. It's, yeah, you're my asshole buddy. You're white. You're this. Yeah, great. That's what it comes down to. They're not going to completely abandon things that are making them money, but will we be thrown back to an era where there will be lots of companies where discrimination is practiced widely? Even with all these laws, there were tons of people who are still suing because they got discriminated, because they were being called this. That's all been happening with all these laws in place. Now, where they don't have to, where they can discriminate, you goddamn real they will. It's not just hiring and jobs. Think about the impact to all the Black and Latino-owned and women-owned businesses. That's the real power. Like you said, we're in a capitalist society. So when you stop supporting them and all the groups that they've stopped supporting, they'll have less power. And then in schools, children are not going to be taught any Black history or Latino history or any of the things you mentioned here. They'll learn more about history in this show than they will have in 12 years of going to school. I want to be optimistic. As a matter of fact, I hope you're completely right. I hope this shit turns around quickly. And I know you didn't say quickly, but I feel like there's a lot more damage going to be done for the future, that we're going to have to undo what's being done, that's being done so quickly in a month, I feel is going to take decades to undo. Because what's also in the DNA of this country is racism, classism, and all the isms you were talking about before. That's in the DNA.
Are you English?
No, I'm not English. Why?
No, because you are pretty.
So, does your client have a name?
He desires to remain anonymous.
Emilia Perez, which is Netflix's Mexican cartel musical that was nominated for 13 Oscar awards, including Best Picture and Best International Film for France. And so this sort of cultural duality ignited a firestorm, a huge debate around, yes, is the movie really French or is the movie Latino, and who can get to claim that? Who has the right to claim that? And so it's really become more of a philosophical, existential sort of question about the creator's rights versus the audience's rights. And I wanted to ask you, you've directed movies, but you've also been a film critic. And as a film critic, you're part of the audience. And when someone tells a story wrong about the Black experience, you might have problems with it. So when you find out that the director is not Black but white, and you understand the history with Mexicans and Blacks and Hollywood in this country for the last 100 years, and how Birth of a Nation essentially damned the color Black skin, and how The Greaser's Gauntlet from the same director, D.W. Griffith, he condemned brown skin. And we know how that has shaped generations of how people perceive us. Do you have a right to demand respect and cultural integrity to the movies that are told about the Black experience? Who is right here, Mike? Who?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, Jack Rico, because I have a lot of thoughts on that, because I completely understand the outrage about Emilia Perez, and I see both sides of it, and it reminds me of the blaxploitation era. For those who don't know, is an era in the 70s where there are tons and tons of Black, quote unquote, movies with Black stars. And this is where Shaft and Coffee and Foxy Brown and Pam Grier and all these Black actors and Black icons came out of it, that whole blaxploitation era. Now, anybody who loves film, anybody who's Black, you wince at the term blaxploitation, because it got that term because it was, yes, starring lots of Black people. And yes, it, quote unquote, was representing us more than we'd ever been, but it wasn't culturally authentic. It was almost a caricature, but it was digested and eaten, and it made lots of money. So I understand a film like Emilia Perez, the good side is the talent. This is Zoe Saldana's getting the most flowers she's ever gotten in her life. Selena Gomez is getting great reviews, and Carla Sofia Gascon, who follows me, by the way, on Instagram, and is getting all these awards and flowers. Talent is getting to work, and people who should get to shine are getting to shine. But what are they shining in? You use a very specific term. Who has the right? Do you have the right to make this film? A, if you're not from that culture, and B, you haven't strived for cultural authenticity. And if you do strive for it and you're not from that culture, do you have the right? Do you have the right to tell a slave revenge story if you're a white man, even if you get a Black producer? Obviously, I'm talking about Django Unchained. So I'm just saying. So I understand it's a big question, and it was the biggest issue that, and I say this having just done a commentary, a little plug here, Blu-ray commentary for a blaxploitation box set that just came out. And so I had to delve into this history of that era. I was too young to really be seeing those movies at that time, but I'm aware of them. Some of them I've seen, but now I have a deeper understanding. And yes, this was the issue. Exactly what you're talking about. You have someone who's not Mexican playing Mexican. You have a director who is not from Mexico, who is not strive for any cultural authenticity other than to further the narratives we've already seen in movies about Mexico.
What's really interesting is that there was this German newspaper, EW, and they actually talked to Audiard about the actual issue. Here's what he said. The real question is, am I entitled to speak about certain topics? As a white heterosexual Frenchman in his early 70s, am I allowed to deal with gender transition? That's what this backlash is about. I think I'm allowed to tell that story. I live in this world. I read and perceive. I think about things. And why shouldn't I formulate and express them, whether in a spoken, sung, or even danced form? I wanted to go for bigger dimensions, broaden my perspective as an artist, reach a wider audience. And I get that, Mike. And I totally, as a creator myself who writes stories, I understand the creative aspect of that. But then I put myself as the audience member as well. I told you this story, how powerful television shows are, how powerful stories are, and how global they are. I ended up going to Morocco with my wife. And while we were there, we went to a restaurant, and a waiter who was serving us had asked me, where I was from. I told him I was from Colombia, Colombian American. And his answer to me, his reply to me, was a sign of him snorting coke and then smiling at me and telling me, I watched Narcos on Netflix. And I looked at him in shock, and I said to him, hey, that's offensive. I looked at my wife and I said, whose fault is this that in Morocco, out of all the places, what is this really all about? Why do the creators get all the power, but the audience doesn't? And to me, Mike, it comes down to representation. I don't think that the issue is who the creator, where the creator is from. Is do you give a fuck about getting it right?
Now, you see, therein comes what I would consider to be privilege. A white filmmaker has the privilege to not give a fuck about what he's actually putting out there, saying, or who he's offending from the group that he's trying to make money off of. David Ayer is a great example, if you're familiar with any of his work. He's often, he's a white filmmaker who loves Latino culture, loves writing stories about Latinos, but they're all stereotypes.
Oh, and then you have a guy like Damon Lindelof who did Watchmen, and he did it well because he had responsible storytelling.
He gave a fuck.
He cared.
Gave a fuck.
That's why no one crucified him.
That's right.
That's why. There's this quote by this guy named George Gerbner. He's a media educator, very popular within the academic field. And he once said, who tells the stories of a culture really governs human behavior? And that was such a powerful quote to me.
Very powerful.
Because it comes down to subjugation, to oppression. I think that if you care and you improve the representation numbers to a point that there's so many people directing Mexican movies for mainstream audiences that, you know what, you're not even going to care if someone gets it wrong once in a while because the numbers are so high that you put that in the margin of error. Hey, we're just experimenting, trying new things, trying to be... You reframe it. But right now, it's an open wound.
So you're saying it might be mexploitation films.
Man, that is, yes.
It's a new
it's like the mexploitation era.
Let's get
And that's it for this episode of Brown and Black. If you would like to support this podcast, please subscribe and leave a review. Your help will allow us to be heard by many more people. You can follow our comments and opinions on @BrownBlackPodcast on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube. We'll see you on the next episode
of Brown and Black.